Hello, my name is Danny. I'm the founder and director of the Bridge Costa Rica, gap, a supportive gap community um, for young adults in Costa Rica.
My name is Andy. I'm one of the founders, the experiential education director and transition coordinator for New Summit Academy, Costa Rica.
So, we want to talk to you today about coming of age in foreign lands. So, this is a presentation that we just gave at the Young Adult Transitions Association conference. And we want to not only share it, well, we shared it with the people that were there, but we thought we'd like to share it with everybody that has an interest in coming of age experiences and the cognitive benefits that come from those kinds of experiences.
If you have any further questions or would like to follow up with us, you can certainly do so via our websites.
Yeah, certainly. Maybe, Andy, we can get warmed up by talking a little bit about our own coming of age experiences, and then that can get those of us listening to us
Sure.
To think about their own coming of age experiences.
Great. Yeah, I think one of the most important coming of age experiences that I had was moving to rural Costa Rica down to the Osa Peninsula at the age of 22, about 16 years ago, and coming from the Midwest, a predominantly white upper middle class culture, and moving down to dirt roads and rainforest and to a Spanish-speaking culture. I didn't speak Spanish at the time when I moved down, and just really being out of my element, not understanding what was going on around me, not understanding why I was looked at differently, just really feeling like a minority as I was. And having that feeling for the first time, where I didn't really understand, I wasn't the guy to sort of call the shots. This isn't easy to me as it was sort of just navigating life back home in Michigan. Really opened my eyes to, boy, I have to really be aware of what's going on. I really need to take some note on how people are interacting, what they said about this, how this works. And just really being on my toes and looking at life through a completely different lens, as well as the lens of the life in Costa Rica, but the lens of being a foreigner living in Costa Rica, and sort of what that meant, how people viewed me, and sort of even before they knew me, sort of the ideas that they had about me before we even had relationships. So I think that was one of the biggest ones for me. How about yourself?
I'd say my coming of age experiences was the year I spent in South Africa when I was 17, turning 18, and that was a very challenging time for me as well. Very different culture, and I don't think I was ready to take in a different world in that way, but I guess I did it through the experience. One particular time that I always look back at as sort of the time when I changed from being a kid to being an adult is when there was this one time where I was in the eastern side of South Africa in Durban, and I was there to see a surfing tournament, but then the program called me and asked me to go back to Cape Town because I needed to be in school, and I just wanted to skip 1 or 2 days and go see the surfing tournament, and I just wanted to get some good times because I was being challenged so much, but I had to go back, and I was really thinking to myself, wow, this is really not what I signed up for, and as soon as I set foot in my host family's house once again, this epiphany came to me that said, you're not here for the fun, you're here to be challenged. And then I thought to myself, well, that's life. You're not, the fun comes from being challenged. And then it all changed for me, and I felt, okay, you enjoy being challenged, and that's what being an adult is all about. And so that was my coming of age experience, and we'd like you to think about it. Think about your own coming of age experiences. Think about when they happen, how they challenged you in some way, because that is part of what coming of age is all about. Is it usually entails some kind of challenge, some kind of sort of being out of the comfort zone. It's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Before we go into the substance of the presentation, we'd like to go over the general objective as well as the specific objectives. As a general objective, we would like for you to walk away with a better understanding of the cognitive and developmental shifts that take place while people are immersed in a different culture, if the conditions, the key conditions, are present and proper guidance is provided. This will help you understand why our students benefit so much from cross-cultural immersions, and it helps them so much in their personal growth. The first section it focuses on the background of what we want to talk about. We will be talking there about coming of age experiences across cultures and across time, and how these experiences have been used in many cultures throughout the history of humanity, as well as nowadays how young adults are transitioning. The second section is a review of the research. Here we're going to talk a bit about theories on cognitive development and how people learn, what goes on in the brain when people are learning. We're going to go over some of the advantages of the structures, the cognitive structures we develop while we learn, but also some of the limitations. Then we're going to talk about what are some ways in which we can change those structures and continue learning and growing. And we're also going to talk about a very important cognitive skill called integrative complexity or cognitive complexity, which is what the research is saying is the main skill that people who engage in cross-cultural immersions are getting. And we're going to talk a little bit about the research that's coming out with that. The third section will focus on the application of cross-cultural experiences and how to get the most out of integrative complexity. So we're going to, for this section, we're going to use lots of video testimonials of past and present students, where we're going to go over some of the accommodative leaps that they're going through, some of the structural changes in their way of seeing the world. We're going to go over the key conditions that lead to integrative complexity, and we're going to bring it back around to talking about how this can benefit people that are struggling, specifically the young adults that we work with, and how we use this for our therapeutic work with them. Rooted in history, what we want to talk about here is the fact that when we talk about coming of age in foreign lands, we're not talking about anything new. Coming of age experiences in foreign lands have been going on pretty much throughout human history. For the longest time, humans have understood that the transition from childhood to adulthood is a very important one, and that young people cannot go into adulthood with the same mindset. So there needs to be a rite of passage, something that differentiates one stage and the other stage. And so there have always been very important experiences, very important markers that signify that change. And a lot of the time, these experiences have entailed moving away from the town or the home environment for a period of time and then coming back, and that transition signifying the change from childhood to adulthood. And we can see that across cultures. The picture here is from Southern Africa and their rites of passage from childhood to adulthood, and they go away for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, and they're secluded in the mountains of the African savannah, and then come back to their village.
So when we think about rooted in history, and we think about these rites of passage of becoming adults, and we look at young adulthood in our own culture, I want to invite you to think about what those coming of age experiences are for our young adults in the culture in the United States. It's a little bit muddled. There's not a clear sort of defining moment in that transition from adolescent to young adulthood to say, aha, I've made it to adulthood. What we're finding is that students and young adults, adolescents have a prolonged period of identity exploration where they may take a gap year, they may go to college for a little bit and then try some work experience or volunteer. There's certainly statistics are showing that they're getting married and getting into adult relationships and having kids a lot later. And so we're seeing this transitioning period becoming a little bit more. Two ways to look at it. One way, it's a little bit more time for them to really explore their passions and delve into what's important to them and really sort of find their career path. But also with so many different opportunities, so many different career paths or ways in which they can guide their lives, can produce quite a bit of anxiety. And so we're seeing this, the young adults really, especially the population that we're working with, a little bit unclear of what the next step is for them.
Yeah, the research talks about the fact that young adults or adolescents nowadays are pretty much the same as they were 50 years ago, 80 years ago in terms of their development, their ability to make decisions, their level of maturity, and so on and so forth. But the society has changed a lot, and so the way the easiness with which they can find a job that will sustain a family, the expectations set for them, the amount of education, life education, makes it just changes the game in a lot of ways. And so in a lot of ways, what the research is saying is that young adults these days have a level of maturity that isn't as, it doesn't flow as well with the demands that society has for them. So they're developing in similar ways, but perhaps the practices, the kinds of experiences they're having are not preparing them as well for the kinds of experiences or the kinds of responsibilities that they are going to need to have as adults.
Well, and when Danny and I were discussing this earlier, we were thinking, well, and maybe you can think on this as far as a rite of passage for you as a young adult, perhaps was going off to college. And what we're seeing nowadays is that even the students going off to college, the difference isn't necessarily enough to make that switch. Being connected, via social media, many times even going to college in their own state, and just being too close to home, it's really not producing that stark rite of passage where maybe you or I, when we went off to college, even though we might have been close to home within a few hours, we didn't have the access to media and social media and cell phones and all of those things that made everything feel a little bit more close. So now that we understand sort of the macro level of coming of age experience throughout history, and we look at even what's happening recently with our young adults and our adolescents as far as their own coming of age experiences, it's important to take a step back and really understand the cognitive development behind how worldviews are formed in the first place, how we get to understand the world. And from there, then we can sort of look at how those worldviews are changed through these experiences that we're trying to foster for our students. So it's really important when we understand sort of coming in and making sense of the world. There's what we call schemas, or what are categories or boxes of knowledge for us to be able to understand what's happening in the world.
We come to this world with very little knowledge of how to make it work in the world versus other animals that come to the world and their instincts just kick in. And the reason for that is that we learn a lot from experience, and the way we learn from experience is by creating these little boxes of knowledge that are called schemas. And schemas are ways in which we understand or respond to the world, and they're pre-given responses. And so when a toddler is beginning to understand language, they, for example, will say "wow, wow" to try to make the sound of a barking dog. But they will say that for a horse, they'll say that for a cat, they'll say that for a cow. And the reason is that they have created a box of knowledge of a four-legged furry animal. But as time goes on, they're able to refine that into a box that fits better the reality that they live. And we do that for all kinds of things, to get up and shower, to distinguish whether a red light is, means to stop or go, and so on and so forth. And then at the macro level, we use that for science, to predict the weather, all those kinds of things. And that's the way it's our best survival tool. In his book, The Social Brain, Richard Crisp says, to survive, we need to predict. That is the main tool that humans use for survival. We talked a little bit about the advantages of that because it helps our survival, but what about the limitations of that?
Yeah, so some of the limitations is that we've become so efficient at becoming prediction machines, being able to predict things coming into from the environment, and sort of enslaving our neural processors in a way that sort of become just routine. And so the limitations are that we are really ineffective at processing new information a lot of times because we're so ingrained in our habit or our routine. So we end up missing a lot of clues. Those are called cognitive blind spots. Even so much to the fact that, with our students that we're working with, they can get caught into these sort of negative schemas. And so this sort of negative self-thought, these destructive patterns or behaviors, those are so ingrained that we can miss clues. We're not efficient at processing new information because we're already predicting what we know.
So that once we've created these large boxes of knowledge, new incoming activity in the brain can kind of end up fitting into the box. So we can't see things as new, and we just kind of fall into these routines, and we can't really see that something should be different. And so there can be more judgment, there can be more difficulty to see other possibilities, and it can make it harder to change. So while these schemas are good for survival, they also limit our capacity to learn and grow once they're well established. A schema doesn't mean it's a good schema or it's an efficient schema. So you might also learn habits or create categories that are not very useful. So sometimes avoidant behavior or aggressive behavior, addictive behavior, those are schemas as well. They're tendencies, they're neural pathways that say this is the way you should go about it, and perhaps other options for responding to life are dismissed because of those categories that are created. And so that's partially one of those limitations.
Yeah, and I love the sort of the way that you explained it to me one day when we were talking about these sort of neural pathways as, the more that we do it, the more highly developed they are, kind of like going down the highway, right? When we're driving down the highway, we can go very fast, and, technically we can do other things while we're going down the highway, although we shouldn't. But then compared to sort of doing something in a new or a different way, going down that sort of washed out dirt road, where it might be a little bit more slow going, a little bit more uncomfortable, as we try some new things, it was a really a good way for us to sort of understand, how that works in the brain.
Yeah, for sure. A well-paved schema will typically be chosen by the brain because it, again, saves a lot of energy, saves the unpredictability. but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the most efficient.
Well, and then we think about with our sons or our clients or our, our students. I would invite you to think about the schemas that you've seen, perhaps the efficient ones, the unhealthy ones, and sort of keep those in mind as we continue to talk a little bit more about this.
So now that we've talked about the development of schemas and their benefits and also their limitations, now we have to wonder, well, of course we can't just stay with our existing schemas. They have to develop and change in some kind of way. Otherwise, we'd stick with schemas that aren't very useful. And while sometimes we do, there are certainly ways in which we can change them. That's why kids don't always say wow, wow, and they end up saying horse and cat and dog. And we also change our ways of being. And so we want to talk a little bit about that, because that's very essential to the work we do, is helping people make those kinds of shifts to find better ways of going about their lives. So in order to talk about that, we want to talk about the theories that were developed by the developmental psychologist Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget talked about two types of learning. One type of learning he called assimilation, and another type of learning he called accommodation. Assimilation is a type of learning where you add more information to the same schema. So it just piles on to the same box and it reinforces the same kind of meaning, but it doesn't necessarily do anything to the box. Whereas accommodation is a kind of learning where you actually have to change the box, morph the box, or create another box altogether. And that happens when the incoming stimuli does not fit any of the boxes that already exist. And so you have to go through the effort of creating a new one. And when we're talking about the personal growth that our students do, we are encouraging a lot of accommodative leaps, a lot of accommodation in the way they see the world, so that it's not just the same, but that they're being encouraged to create new ways of going about them. And the literature says that is the most developmental type of learning. It's the one where you grow the most, because it makes you make those kinds of leaps and changes that are needed. Dabrowski, who is also a developmental psychologist, had a great quote, which is there in blue. The course of development passes through the loosening of rigid structures. And so what he's saying about that is that when you're going to develop, you're going to make a change in your life, you need to loosen whatever structures you've developed and then create them again. He had a great concept called positive disintegrations. And what he meant by that is that you disintegrate your own structures, your own schemas, and then put them together again in a more evolved way or in a more efficient way. And that's a lot of the course of growth that goes on in human beings. Going back to Jean Piaget in the first quote, what he's saying there is that the more schemas you create and the better differentiation there is between them, which means the more accommodative leaps you have taken, then the more welcoming you get to new information. Because when you have a lot of schemas, then it's easier for you to enjoy novelty as opposed to perceive it as annoyance. A lot of times, and with the students that we work with and in our own lives, we do not welcome uncertainty. We do not welcome situations that are out of our comfort zone. But a lot of the times, those are the ones that teach us the most. And then finally, the third quote here speaks about the skill that people develop when they go through accommodative leaps time and time again. And that the name of this concept, or the name of this skill, is cognitive complexity, or or integrative complexity. And so at the bottom there, what it says is that people who possess this skill have a large number or breadth of schemas, and their knowledge structures are highly integrated. So what they do is they have a lot of schemas, and those schemas have a lot of connections between them, kind of like the highway that we were talking about before. There's lots of connecting streets between those highways, so that you can take a path and go over and move to another path, or connect different paths and integrate and create new solutions to different problems. And so this ends up being very helpful to the process that we're trying to have our students go through, and the skills that we want them to have, because the better you get at disintegrating yourself and creating new structures, the better you get at problem solving. That's what being resourceful is all about. So after seeing the benefits of dislodging and expanding worldviews through positive disintegrations, now we get to talk about cross-cultural immersion and the research that's coming out on how cross-cultural immersions actually help people create the cognitive complexity or integrative complexity that is so useful in problem solving and just being creative. So I want to go over a couple of the studies here, one from Maddox in 2013, and this one specifically is talking about integrative complexity, and he's talking specifically about engaging with people in another culture, and he says psychologically, which means that you're not just in the place where these other people live, but you're also sharing with them enough that you can think in the way they think, or at least take in those perspectives. And what he's saying this does is it provides a contrast between it provides a contrast between what they think and what other people think, and that helps them question what they think and learn to appreciate, but also challenge their own way of seeing the world. And this challenging of positions is what creates a lot of the integrative complexity that is so useful for problem solving, because then you can say, well, I could think about it this way, or I could think about it this way, I could go about it this way or that way, take in other people's positions, and that can be very helpful in that way. The bottom quote is on a study specifically focused on creativity, but it's also on people who experience two or more cultures or are said to be multicultural. And I like the words being used on this one because it talks about juxtaposing and synthesizing cognitive elements from two or more cultures and how that is linked to creativity. Juxtaposing and synthesizing talks about the integration that happens when people are exposed to different ways of seeing the world and different ways of going about problem solving. So it's not just about having these fixed schemas here and there about solving it this way or that way, but actually creating something new that is efficient to the situation at hand. And that's a lot of what we're focusing on in terms of the cultural immersion that our students are doing, and with each other and their relationships, right? Learning to take in other students' perspectives, learning to take in the local culture and their perspectives, so that they themselves can get creative and integrate different perspectives to their own lives. So now what we're going to do is we're going to watch a few videos, testimonials of former students and current students who will talk about experiences that I've had related to cross-cultural immersion, where we want to pay attention and see the integrative complexity that is increasing in the students, that's arising in the students through these experiences.
When I think about Granada de Oro, it's like this second home that I found. And that might sound cliche, but it was an indescribable experience for me, really. Like, I don't know, where I'm from, it's, you know, it's so big. And like, I don't even know my next door neighbors, you know, and in my mind, it's like, we're just, you know, we're coming there to do community service. No one's going to notice us. No one's going to, but that was the opposite, you know, and it's like the whole town kind of noticed us. And I felt seen and known by the whole town, and just going into each other's houses, and I don't know, that sense of community that's there, and that sense of love that they have for each other and for other people, like the things that they were wishing on us. I mean, it's amazing.
I think that in the world today there's a lot of immigration because there's a lot of unhappiness. A lot of people unfulfilled in their lives, or put in situations where it's not healthy or even feasible for them to live in their current situation. And they're left with only one option: to move. So the world is in a crisis right now, with Mexicans immigrating into the US, with Syrians immigrating into Greece, with Middle Easterners immigrating into Europe. Who are we to tell them no, but also, can we sustain them? It's a really hard issue to talk about. Like, I'll use this school as an example. So this school has a certain amount of kids, and when new kids come in, it can cause conflict or friction if we don't always get along with the same ideals or personalities. And then at the same time, if kids come in, they need help, which is why they're coming here, to make them have, or to help them get a better life. Who are we to tell them, no, you can't work here? So it's all about finding balance with each other. The world needs to find balance with itself. We need to find balance with immigrants coming in from foreign lands, or else nothing's going to happen. There's going to be no progress. We're just going to regress.
Being in a different place has also sort of affirmed for me the truth that there really is no one right way of living, and that the way that I was living and functioning, you know, in the States is not necessarily the way it has to be or should be.
My first semester in college, I was rooming with a person from China, and I feel like if I didn't, I guess, immerse myself in a different culture, a lot of things that he did and how he behaved and lived with me, I would have taken a lot differently, and I wouldn't have accepted it as much. So just, I think what it really did to me was just understand that my way is not always the way.
Because a lot of the time you hear on the news, things are happening someplace in the world, and you just go, why would that ever make sense? And when you get in the, get your head wrapped around the idea that people's minds work differently different places, things start to make a little bit more sense, and the world starts to make more sense. Even if the idea still doesn't make sense to you, you have a better idea that people think differently, and you have a better acceptance of people and ideas that way. Yeah.
So in the first section of the video, we listened to Alex talking about his experience in rural Costa Rica, and really highlighting the fact that he was going into it with some preconceived assumptions of nobody would take notice, and then really highlighting the fact that he felt seen. He felt an unbelievable amount of acceptance and love and care from the neighborhood, and so it was just sort of changing his perspective through having the experience. We see in the middle section when we hear from Joe, really taking a complex issue of immigration, you know, across borders worldwide, and then sort of tailoring or whittling that down and applying it to his experience here at New Summit Academy, where he's able to look at new students in a similar way to immigration, and really sort of take, you know, these big picture, these big complex issues and apply it to a local or in a personal setting. And then with the three guys in South Africa, you know, each of them really highlighted the fact that wow, maybe their way of thinking isn't the only way of thinking. With Kenton's experience with the foreign exchange students, really having a little bit more understanding of different cultures, and Max talking about, wow, maybe the way that I was taught isn't the only way, and then Mike obviously looking at the world news, and why would that make sense? And oh, well, it might not make sense to us, but it might make perfectly sense in the other corner of the world, and that's okay. And really being understanding and accepting and having different perspectives, and really sort of choosing and borrowing from each of their different schemas through their experience of cultural immersion. And so all of these three guys really sort of what they're saying is, boy, I got out of my own way of thinking, and I sort of got a little bit of insight into what others are thinking, and all of a sudden, the world makes a bit more sense. I'm open to others' perspectives. Really important things to highlight, because these are, you're hearing from the students in their own words and their own perspectives, certainly not guided, just asking about their experiences related to being immersed in another culture.
Yeah, and in a couple of slides now, because these experiences that they're sharing are related to engaging with the other culture, and they're talking about the impact of those experiences. But in a little bit, we're going to be talking about how those experiences translate to specific psychological benefits, and so it's not just about engaging in other cultures and in befriending them and taking in their perspectives, but it also has an effect on their own personal development.
So in order to create these accommodative leaps, we need to look at the key conditions that are needed to help activate this learning.
Dual engagement refers to people taking in both the host culture that they're immersed in and home culture during a cultural immersion experience. Sometimes people come to a new culture and they just totally take in the culture that they're immersed in and totally forget about their home culture, or do the opposite. They totally maintain their home culture and don't really engage in the host culture. So in order to really gain the most out of the experience, get the most of accommodative leaps and the ensuing integrative complexity, it's important that people have a way to engage and reflect on both cultures simultaneously.
So the next key condition that we'd like to talk about is cultural distance. Referring to our graph here, this is research that was suggested by Tadmore and Tetlock when they suggested this sort of inverted U-shape for potential change in integrative complexity. On the y-axis, we have the potential change, and on the x-axis, we have the cultural distance. Cultural distance we're going to think about as familiarity to cultural norms, sort of what's depicted in the media, what we might already have some existing schema or existing knowledge about. So if we look at the x-axis, on the far left, we have Canada, England, and Australia. We might know a bit about those cultures. We might have family members that have traveled there, and we've seen it depicted in the media. We know a little bit about it. But also their cultural norms are very similar to what ours might be in the US. On the far right, we have other countries that we may have no sort of prior knowledge about: North Korea, Afghanistan, and Burundi. And those countries may not even be friendly to immersing students or immersing adults. So there's not a lot of potential change for integrative complexity. We're going to get a little bit more isolation or sort of marginalization traveling to those countries. Where we're going to get the richest or the most potential change for integrative complexity is with a country that is accepting of foreign tourists or foreign immersing students or adults, and have a culture that is similar enough but different enough where students or adults are challenged to sort of create new schemas, broaden the breadth of already existing schemas. And so we look at countries that we frequent, Costa Rica, Peru, South Africa, as countries that we're going to see the most potential change for integrative complexity. Danny, do you want to talk about maybe the third condition?
The third key condition is a very important one, and it's called immersion. The research says that there is a difference in the time that you spend in a foreign culture, as well as the intensity of that immersion. So if you're only spending some of the time with the locals versus spending all the time with the locals, it makes a difference. If you're taking just a week-long visit to a country versus spending a year, it makes a difference. It's not defined how long, because it depends on the person and their prior experience in cultural immersion. But this one's very important. It's very important for us as well, because part of our methodology in our program is called supportive immersion. The process of cultural immersion is really important. The condition of immersion is really important because we work with populations that need support in this immersion. If you just were to drop them in a foreign country and have them figure it out on their own, it would be very difficult. So part of our methodology, we have an approach that's called supportive immersion. And for us, the three conditions are kind of general, but for a population like the one we work with, supportive immersion is essential. And what that requires is that there is a guide walking through the experience with the person going through the immersion experience and helping with the reflection, helping meet personal goals as part of the experience.
So now that we have sort of the big picture, we know about schemas and we know about integrative complexity, and we've looked at the key conditions of how we sort of facilitate this with our students. Let's look at the results. In the next little section, you'll look at a few videos from our students, but we certainly want to highlight what we're seeing and the results that we're getting with our guides. One being a clear sense of self and future orientation. The second being an improved self-confidence. The third is having a bit more resilience or sort of increased comfort in ambiguous situations. And then the fourth is an expanded perspective on life, others, and their self. And so when you look at these videos, see what you can pick up on and enjoy them.
I don't know, there's something about this town that kind of inspired that passion within me, and I think it allowed me to grow up a little bit, and by that I mean, just like see myself in this world a little bit more, I've been getting really excited about going out and living on my own, and I think it's because, I'm learning just like small things, like how to paint a room, and I'm just like, wow, and it's kind of like, I think I've made some connections between, okay, this is why we do this stuff, this is why we're learning this stuff, because this is what it's like when you're out on your own.
I've not done anything wrong. I've messed up. I made a mistake. Everyone does, but it's not about not making mistakes. It's about learning from those mistakes and not making the mistake where it's like, whoa, dude. This place has been a practice field, right? The game's life. Make life what I want it to be. And without that, you don't have any purpose. You don't have any drive. So that's what this place has been. It's been an opportunity for me to do that.
A way that I learned from this experience was speaking the language, and I'm really bad at speaking Spanish, but it's almost a humble way of introducing yourself when you don't really know the language, but at least you're trying, and people will smile from that and take it as if you're just trying to know them and know their culture. So that was like one of the most important things I learned from going through experiences of meeting new people here, was just trying to speak their language and showing a humbleness by speaking their language.
Process of changing, and I mean changing anything in your life, in your home, in your career, whatever it is. I don't think for me or anybody else it's ever going to be easy, and it's never going to be as quick or as sudden or gratifying as you either expect or want it to be. And coming through this experience, I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a discouraging thing. I think that's the reality, that change isn't going to come overnight, and it's not going to come when you're in the same situation. And I'm glad to have made it this far, and I know that it's not going to be easy or a smooth ride going forward in the next month, in the next year, in the rest of my entire life. It's never going to be easy or smooth sailing. But I think I've made it this far, and I've done some things that I'm very proud of, and I don't see any reason why I can't continue to do so.
Back in my life in the States, where everything was really busy, and I didn't have time to chill out and reflect on what people thought about me and how I could maybe change myself. But here, it was different. Being out of the country gave me a lot more perspective on how things could be different in my life, and how just because it's something I was used to in the United States doesn't mean that it was the right thing that I should be doing. So yeah, I would say that living abroad, it gives you a big change in perspective, not just of the culture that you're in, but of yourself, because it's change, and I'm an advocate for change. I think it's good because it switches up the tempo, and if you're with people that are caring for you, I feel like just good things can come from it.
We had talked before about the accommodative leaps that students go through in their cross-cultural experiences, and we had seen the videos of the students talking about how those encounters led them to have better understanding and kind of putting themselves in other shoes, and expanding their worldview, and seeing truth as something that's sort of more malleable and flexible. But we said, okay, later we'll talk about the psychological benefits of this way of thinking. So we're here now, and want to offer 4 different benefits that we see students get. And this is in part compilation of the research that we have done, and also what we're seeing in our students. The first one is a clearer sense of self and future orientation. And what this refers to is the ability of the students to clarify who they are, what they value, what they stand for, their challenges and their strengths, and being able to orient that toward their future. Oh, okay, so this is the person that I want to be, and this is something that is known to be very challenging for young adults in general across time, but more so in this day and age because of all the choices, all the demands. And so it's a huge benefit that we're seeing our students get is that they come out of the program understanding, okay, this is who I am, this is who I want to be. The second one is improved self-confidence. This comes from the ability to resolve problems in a better way than they used to, and this also has to do with the creative thinking and their resourcefulness that they gain. Because in the past, what they got a lot was, they're kind of the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But through this experience, they're able to realize, my way doesn't have to be the way. There are other ways. And after practicing in these different ways, then they become more, they improve their efficacy at solving problems, which in turn improves their confidence in themselves.
The third that we'd like to look at is, increased comfort in new and different situations, or resilience. What we're seeing is students, are having to navigate sort of uncomfortable situations, navigate some gray areas, practice, new skills in a way that is humbling, and allows them to sort of make those mistakes, in a safe environment, and then use those mistakes for learning, and apply that to the future. And then the fourth is expanded perspective on life, others, and self. So like we talked about, or like we heard from the guys in South Africa, is just understanding that, there's a lot of different perspectives out there. There's, a lot of different truths out there. Which one is the right one? Are any of them right? How can I use what your truth is, and what my truth is? They may be different, to sort of bridge the gap, to create those relationships, and so that I'm not alienating others, or I'm not sort of alienating myself, but able to sort of bridge that gap and say, oh, wow, your way of thinking is really different. I like it. I don't necessarily understand it. I want to understand more. And so we're seeing these guys really have that thirst for exploring different perspectives, and really sort of getting deeper into those relationships with people.
So we get to the end of our presentation here, and we want to bring it back to young adults again, because we had started there and talking about what it's like to come of age nowadays, and so on and so forth. And we know that during that transition, people can get stuck, and people can have a hard time feeling like they can do it, finding a path, feeling like they're even worth it to find that path. And there's a lot of obstacles that they're finding. And so that can be very challenging. And what we want to offer is, and we pose it as a question, is what can integrative complexity and divergent thinking do for people that are struggling like that? Sometimes people think that immersing in another culture is just not the thing to do, because it's too shocking, it's too uncomfortable, and someone that's already struggling shouldn't go through more discomfort. But what we want to offer is that, because of the supportive immersion that we were talking about before, and the guidance that we provide our students, we help them get unstuck through the perspectives that they're seeing and the openness of world that the experience is provoking, so that their mindset and the schemas they've developed that aren't as helpful can be dislodged, like we had seen before, and that can be expanded. And so when you think about someone that is depressed, there's a lot of ruminating thoughts of, this is the way it is, it's never going to change, people don't like me, I am useless, things like that. That's just one example of the way in which people get stuck in a worldview that isn't as useful. Or for example, there was an example of a student who felt like he was never going to really make it as a young adult or as an adult, because he didn't feel he had the cognitive skills to be a star at college and get a job and be a doctor like his parents. And in one of the immersions, the cultural immersion experiences that we had, he reflected on that and realized, hey, these people just work. They get up, they work hard, and they make a living through doing that. And for him, that was a big accommodative leap. There was a big shift, because then he realized, wow, I can work and I actually have some talent to offer. I don't have to be a doctor in order to make it in the world. And so we're using a lot of these cross-cultural experiences to create shifts in them that allow them to be more resourceful in problem solving and in seeing the world, that then bring a change to to their own selves and to their own cognitive development, and it allows them to then say, I am prepared for the next step in my life. I am prepared to be an adult and take care of myself. So what we want to offer finally is the question of, is there such a thing as cultural immersion therapy, and if so, what is that? And if you search for that, that doesn't really exist. People, because of the tradition of looking at cross-cultural experiences as shocking and difficult to adjust to, people haven't used these kinds of experiences for their benefits. But research is turning its eye on it, and as we've seen, people are researching now the benefits of cross-cultural immersion. That has come a lot from globalization, how people are traveling from place to place, and so that expansion of cross-cultural experiences that people are having has led people to see that, hey, there's actually something good that's happening here, and that's what we're seeing with our students. So
as long as the key conditions are followed, cultural immersion therapy and the experience, if not done in the proper way, can be a very shocking experience, depending on the culture that one is immersing in, how it's guided, sort of the process behind it, the reflection behind it. So it really want to reflect back on those key conditions for doing any sort of cultural immersion therapy, because that's where we're going to find the most results and the biggest accommodative leaps and the longest lasting results that guys are able to apply to their own lives.
Mm-hmm. So to conclude, first of all, thank you for joining us on this presentation, and the takeaway point is that there is a lot to be gained from being out of the comfort zone with the proper guidance in order to shift the way we think about things and get better at going through those shifts. And so in that sense, we say, we're teaching people how to fish instead of giving them fish. We're not just giving them standalone skills, we're giving them skills that allow them to problem solve in ways that we just don't know, because we don't know what people are going to encounter. But when you can pull from all these different perspectives and you can say, oh, maybe this, or how about this other perspective, let me try and see it from your perspective and resolve problems that way, then it doesn't really matter as much what the person is encountering, because they have the cognitive skills to
adjust,
to sort of have an effect on the kinds of goals they want to accomplish.